The Arizona sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the rugged desert landscape. Dust swirled in eddies around Clara Bennett's worn boots as she guided her weary horse along a narrow canyon path. She had ridden for days, leaving behind the memories of a life she could no longer endure. Memories of a husband who had died too young, and a town that had offered her no solace. Clara was searching for something she could not yet name. Freedom, perhaps, or a place where her courage could finally mean something. The canyon opened onto a hidden valley, and there, nestled between red cliffs, she glimpsed smoke curling into the sky. At first, she thought it a trick of the sun, a mirage born of heat and exhaustion. But as she drew closer, the outlines of a village became unmistakable. Lodges crafted from earth and timber, small gardens, and figures moving with purpose between them. Clara's heart quickened. She had entered Apache territory, a place forbidden to outsiders, yet somehow fate had guided her here. As she dismounted, brushing dust from her skirts, a figure appeared at the edge of the village. Chief Dakota, tall and commanding, watched her silently from a distance. His dark eyes were sharp and calculating, yet there was a flicker of curiosity in them. Clara could feel his gaze even before he spoke, and it stirred something inside her she had not felt in years, a mixture of fear and undeniable fascination. "Who comes here?" a voice called from the shadows of the village. Clara turned to see an older warrior step forward, bowing slightly in respect to Dakota. Clara lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the tension. "My name is Clara Bennett. I mean no harm. I seek only shelter for the night." Dakota did not respond immediately. Instead, he stepped from the shadows, his presence magnetic. Clara noticed the way his movements were deliberate, measured, as if every step carried the weight of responsibility for the people behind him. He studied her with an intensity that made her pulse race, and for a moment the desert seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them. "You are far from home," Dakota said at last, his voice low but firm. "The Apache do not welcome strangers lightly," Clara nodded. "I understand. I am only looking for refuge. I am alone." Her admission was not meant to elicit sympathy, yet she could not hide the loneliness in her eyes. Dakota's gaze softened ever so slightly, though his expression remained guarded. A breeze carried the scent of sage and dry earth across the valley. Clara inhaled deeply, letting the wild beauty of the place fill her senses. The sun glinted off the edges of Dakota's features, highlighting the strength and dignity etched into his face. There was something about him that demanded respect, yet something else, a hidden depth that intrigued her, pulling her forward despite the danger of lingering too long. Clara could see the villagers now, moving quietly between lodges, watching her from a distance. She realized that with every cautious step she took closer to the center of the village, she was entering a world that was not hers, yet strangely inviting. For the first time in months, Clara felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this place, wild and untamed as it was, held a chance to reclaim a life she had thought lost forever. Dakota finally gestured, indicating she could remain, temporarily. But his eyes warned her clearly. She must respect the rules of this land, or she would face consequences she could not yet imagine. Clara understood, yet there was a stubbornness in her spirit that refused to bow entirely. She would stay, she decided, and let destiny play its hand. And as the sun dipped behind the cliffs, painting the valley in shades of fire and shadow, Clara Bennett took her first cautious steps into a world of unfamiliar danger, undeniable beauty, and a man whose glance had already begun to chain her heart. The morning sun rose over the valley, spilling light across the adobe lodges and turning the desert cliffs into shades of amber and rust. Clara Bennett stirred in the small, sparsely furnished lodge that Dakota had allowed her to stay in. She had slept little, her mind racing with thoughts of the previous evening, the intensity of Dakota's gaze, the quiet power in his presence, and the inexplicable pull she felt toward him. Every instinct told her to stay cautious, yet every heartbeat seemed to guide her closer to the village and the man who had captured her attention. Curiosity overcame caution. Clara wrapped herself in a worn shawl and stepped outside, careful to keep her movements measured. The village was stirring. Women tending gardens, children playing under the watchful eyes of their elders, and warriors moving with disciplined precision. The air was filled with the scent of earth and sage, mingling with the faint aroma of morning fires. She had studied the village from the canyon's edge the day before, but being here, within its bounds, was different, intimidating yet oddly comforting. Her eyes were drawn to the distant edge of the sacred grove that bordered the village. Despite knowing she shouldn't, Clara felt an irresistible pull toward it. Legends whispered in towns she had passed through spoke of the Apache's sacred lands, areas no outsider dared enter. And yet the thought of seeing the grove up close, of touching the land that belonged to this proud people, filled her with a strange exhilaration. Before she could take more than a few steps, a shadow fell across her path. Dakota stood there, tall and commanding, his silhouette cutting through the morning light. His dark eyes, always sharp and unyielding, held a flicker of warning. "Clara," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that made her pause. "You are not to enter this place. It is forbidden. For your safety and for the sake of my people, you must turn back." Clara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I am not here to harm anyone," she said, her voice steady. "I wish only to see the grove, to understand the land and the people who call it home." For a heartbeat, Dakota said nothing, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. There was something in the tilt of her head, the fearless look in her eyes that made him uneasy and intrigued. Most outsiders would have fled, cowed by the rules and the aura of danger that clung to the sacred grove. Yet here she stood, bold and defiant, unafraid of the power he wielded. Finally he spoke, his voice softer, almost reluctant. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Clara. This is not a place for strangers, especially one who is not bound by our ways." Clara's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "I have lived a life of danger before. I am not afraid." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time Dakota felt a ripple of emotion he had not anticipated. Pride, worry, and something deeper, a pull he could not easily name, stirred within him. Despite the warning he had given, he stepped aside, just enough to allow her a glimpse of the grove beyond. Clara's eyes widened at the sight. Ancient trees with twisted roots, sunlight filtering through leaves in golden beams, and a quiet serenity that seemed to exist apart from the world she knew. The grove was breathtaking, a hidden world preserved by generations of careful guardianship, and for a moment she understood why Dakota was so protective. She turned to him, her gaze softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will be careful. I promise." Dakota nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth hinting at a smile. "Careful, yes. But heed this, rules exist for a reason. You cannot simply walk where you please, yet." His voice faltered slightly, and Clara caught the tension in his expression. The conflict between duty and curiosity, between the laws of his people and the magnetism of her presence. For a fleeting moment, they stood together, two souls from different worlds connected by an unspoken understanding. She was a woman unafraid to defy convention. He was a man bound by responsibility, yet unable to ignore the fire she had sparked in his heart. In that shared silence, Clara realized something that would shape every step she took in the days to come. Their connection, forbidden as it was, had already begun to anchor itself deep within them both. As she reluctantly stepped back from the grove, Dakota's gaze lingered on her, a silent acknowledgement of the defiance he could neither punish nor resist. And in that gaze, Clara felt a thrill she had not known in years, a recognition that the path ahead would be dangerous, forbidden, and utterly unforgettable. The air in the valley grew heavy after Clara's forbidden venture near the sacred grove. Though the village went about its daily rhythm, drums beating softly in the distance, fires crackling, children laughing, it felt as if the very earth was holding its breath. Clara sensed it too. Every glance from the Apache women carried a quiet disapproval. Every whisper from the warriors made her feel like a trespasser in a world she could never truly belong to. But what unsettled her most wasn't their judgment, it was Dakota's silence. He had barely spoken to her since that morning near the grove. When she passed him at the edge of the village, his expression was calm, unreadable. Yet his eyes lingered longer than they should have, as if he was torn between anger and something he dared not admit. Clara had seen that look before in men trying to fight against themselves, the look of someone who wanted to keep control but was losing the battle. By nightfall, she could bear the tension no longer. She found him near the river, where the moonlight glistened across the water. He stood with his arms crossed, his dark hair stirring in the breeze, his presence as still and unyielding as the mountains. You've avoided me all day, Clara said, stepping closer. If I've done wrong, I'd rather you tell me than keep your silence. Dakota didn't turn right away. You were warned, he said finally. His voice was low, calm, but beneath it ran an edge like a blade. You stepped where you were not meant to go. Clara folded her arms, lifting her chin. I only looked. I meant no disrespect. Among my people, Dakota replied, intention does not erase what is done. The sacred places are bound by spirits and memory. To cross into them without permission invites dishonor and danger. His words carried weight, but Clara refused to shrink beneath them. If your spirits are as wise as you say, then they must know my heart held no harm. You may have your rules, Chief Dakota, but I am not a woman who bows easily to warnings. For a long moment, the only sound between them was the soft murmur of the river. Then slowly, Dakota turned to face her. His eyes caught the moonlight, dark, piercing, but filled with a restrained heat. You defy too easily, Clara Bennett. You speak to a chief as if he were a man without duty. Do you think courage makes you untouchable? Clara met his gaze squarely. No, I think courage makes me alive. That answer, so bold, so unguarded, struck something deep within him. For years, Dakota had ruled with clarity and discipline, his heart locked behind walls of tradition. But this woman, this stubborn, fearless outsider, was chipping away at every wall he had built. Her spirit burned like desert fire, and no matter how much he told himself to resist it, the warmth of her defiance drew him in. He took a step closer, his voice softening. You must understand. The people watch me. If I show favor to an outsider, I risk more than my pride. You would be seen as a threat to our ways, and I as a fool for letting you stay. Clara's expression softened, her voice low. And yet, you didn't send me away. Dakota's jaw tightened. Because your eyes speak of storms I have seen before, he said quietly. Pain, loss, but also strength. You remind me of something I had forgotten. The words hung between them, charged and intimate. Clara felt her heart thrum in her chest. She had not come here seeking affection, yet the pull between them was undeniable, like two halves of the same restless wind. Dakota finally turned away, breaking the spell. You may stay, he said, his tone measured once more. But hear me clearly, Clara Bennett, no more defiance. You walk a narrow path between acceptance and exile. One step further, and even I will not be able to protect you. Clara nodded, though deep down she knew her spirit was not one that could easily be contained. As Dakota disappeared into the shadows, she looked toward the sacred grove in the distance. Something inside her whispered that her story with the Apache chief was far from over, and that the warning he had given her was not just about his people, but about the dangerous fire already burning between them both. The Arizona sun hung high and merciless over the valley, baking the red clay of the village paths and casting sharp shadows from the lodges and acacia trees. Clara Bennett woke to the distant sound of hurried voices and the clatter of hooves striking stone and dirt. Something had stirred the village from its usual rhythm, a sense of unease that set her heart pounding. She dressed quickly, tugging her shawl around her shoulders, and followed the sounds toward the center of the village. There she saw Dakota, commanding a group of warriors with the precision of a man who carried the weight of an entire people on his shoulders. His jaw was tight, his movements purposeful, but Clara noticed the quick glances he cast in her direction. His eyes, dark and intense, betrayed concern she had never seen directed at her before. What is happening? She asked one of the women tending the fires. Outlaws, the woman whispered. They've been seen near the canyon passes. They come for the village, maybe for the horses, maybe for revenge. Dakota is gathering the warriors, Clara's stomach clenched. Danger was nothing new to her. She had survived floods, storms, and the harsh judgments of townsfolk. But there was something different about facing a threat in this strange, beautiful place where she had just begun to belong. Yet instinctively she knew she could not stand idly by. Dakota noticed her hesitation, or perhaps her determination, and strode toward her, his presence commanding yet protective. Clara, he said, his voice low, you should stay behind. This is not a place for you. I cannot, Clara replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I may be an outsider, but I can help. I know how to handle myself. I have survived far worse than outlaws on horseback. Dakota's brow furrowed. He knew she was brave, perhaps recklessly so, but the fire in her eyes mirrored the fire of the desert itself, untamable, unyielding. He hesitated, torn between keeping her safe and respecting the strength he could not ignore. Finally, with a curt nod, he allowed her to follow, warning the warriors to keep her near and out of direct danger. The outlaws were cunning, using the canyon's twists and shadows to their advantage. Clara's heart raced as she and a small group of warriors intercepted them near a rocky pass. She moved with surprising agility, ducking behind boulders and helping to herd frightened horses to safety. Dakota's presence was constant, a shadow at her side, protective but not overbearing. Every glance he gave her was charged, and Clara felt the tension between them deepen, even in the midst of danger. During the skirmish, Clara noticed a young boy trapped near the edge of the pass, paralyzed with fear as an outlaw aimed a rifle in his direction. Without hesitation, she ran forward, grabbing the child and pulling him to safety. Dakota's sharp whistle and the warriors' coordinated charge sent the outlaws scattering into the canyon, leaving only echoes and dust behind. Dakota approached her afterward, his expression unreadable, though his chest heaved slightly from exertion. "You risked much," he said, his voice low, carrying both admonishment and something softer, more personal. "I could not leave him," Clara replied, brushing dust and sweat from her face. Her heart was still racing, but beneath the adrenaline a new awareness had taken root. Dakota had seen her courage, her willingness to act, to face danger without hesitation, and she realized, with a thrill that made her pulse quicken, that he respected her for it. For a long moment they stood in silence, the canyon's shadows stretching around them like a protective cloak. In that quiet, Clara felt a shift, an unspoken acknowledgement that their bond, fragile and forbidden though it was, had begun to strengthen. Dakota, a man of discipline and duty, had glimpsed her spirit in action, and it had stirred something deep inside him. Admiration, longing, perhaps even the beginnings of love. As the village slowly returned to its rhythm, Clara knew that she had crossed another threshold. She was no longer just an outsider looking in. She had proven her courage, and Dakota could not deny the connection growing between them. And though the chief's warning still echoed in her mind, Clara understood one thing clearly. The fire between them was now impossible to ignore, even in a world ruled by rules, tradition, and duty. Night fell over the valley like a velvet curtain, muffling the sounds of the village and cloaking the desert in silver moonlight. Clara Bennett lay awake in the small lodge, listening to the whisper of wind through the canyon and the distant murmur of the river. The events of the day, the outlaws, the narrow escapes, and Dakota's watchful presence replayed in her mind. She had survived danger before, but nothing had stirred her heart like the way the Apache chief's eyes had met hers in the chaos. Dark, commanding, yet softened by concern, she could not shake the pull he held over her, and she knew in the quiet honesty of night that her feelings were no longer simple admiration or curiosity. Something deeper had begun to root itself, a yearning that frightened her as much as it thrilled her. A soft knock at the door startled her. She rose, heart fluttering, and opened it to find Dakota standing there, his figure outlined by the moonlight. His eyes were unreadable, yet there was an intensity there that made her pulse leap. "Clara," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I must speak with you." Without waiting for an invitation, he stepped into the lodge, closing the door behind him. The air between them was charged with unspoken tension, a mixture of fear, desire, and the weight of the rules they both knew they were bending by being alone together. "I should not have come," he said finally, breaking the silence. "It is dangerous. For you, for me, for the village, if our people see us together like this." Clara stepped closer, her voice calm yet resolute. "And yet you did. Why?" Dakota's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment before returning to her. "Because I cannot ignore you, Clara. You are unlike anyone I have ever known. You are fierce, unyielding, and yet there is a truth in you that calls to something I thought I had buried long ago." Her breath caught at his words. She had expected caution, warning, perhaps even anger, but not this raw, confessional honesty. "I feel it too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not come here seeking love or danger, but something about you, about this place. It has awakened me." For a heartbeat, they simply stood there, the weight of their shared truths hanging between them. The desert night seemed to hold its breath along with them, the stars blinking down like witnesses to their unfolding story. Dakota took a cautious step closer, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "You defy everything I have been taught to uphold," he said, his voice thick with conflict. "And yet, your courage, your spirit, it binds me. I cannot turn away." Clara reached out, lightly brushing her fingertips against his. The contact was electric, a silent acknowledgement of the pull neither could deny. "Then we must face it," she said softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Dakota's eyes darkened, reflecting both the fire of the moonlit desert and the storm inside him. "You speak boldly, Clara Bennett. I do not know if my people or my own heart can endure the consequences of what we risk tonight." "I do not fear the consequences of being true," she replied, stepping even closer so that only inches separated them. "I fear only what it would mean to live without this, without you." For the first time, Dakota allowed himself to close the distance, his hand finding hers. Firm yet gentle, the connection between them deepened, unspoken promises echoing in the silent lodge. In that night of truth, they shared more than words. They shared recognition, understanding, and the dangerous beginnings of love. Outside, the desert remained vast and untamed, a world governed by rules and tradition. Inside, however, a new reality had taken hold. Two hearts bound by courage and defiance entwined against the odds. And as they lingered in the quiet glow of moonlight, each knew that the path forward would be fraught with challenges, yet irresistible in its promise of passion and belonging. For Clara and Dakota, the night had revealed what neither could deny. Their fates were now linked, their hearts chained by a bond that neither duty nor fear could sever. The dawn rose over the Apache village in muted shades of gold and amber, painting the adobe lodges and rugged cliffs with a gentle light. Yet for Chief Dakota, the morning brought no peace. Even as his warriors went about their duties and the village stirred to life, his mind churned with thoughts he could not control. Clara Bennett had awakened something in him, something powerful and disruptive, and it terrified him. Dakota had always been a man of discipline and tradition. From the moment he had taken up the mantle of chief, he had placed the welfare of his people above all else. The rules were clear. Outsiders were to be kept at a distance, sacred lands were not to be breached, and the bonds of the village were to remain unbroken by influence from beyond their borders. And yet, Clara defied every rule he held sacred, and every defiance drew him further in. He walked along the riverbank, the cool water brushing against his boots, and tried to quell the storm inside. He thought of her. The way she had stood her ground near the sacred grove, her fearless gaze holding his even when he warned her away. He thought of the way she had saved the child during the outlaws' attack, her bravery undeniable, her spirit untamable. And most of all, he thought of that night, when words had failed both of them and only the silent truth in their eyes had spoken. Dakota clenched his fists, frustration and longing warring within him. He was a chief, a protector, a man bound by duty. But how could duty govern the pull he felt toward a woman who was not of his people, who had no claim to his world, yet had captured his heart so completely? To yield to his feelings was to risk scandal, to invite distrust and perhaps even endanger the village he loved. And yet to resist her was to deny a truth he could not escape. The elders had noticed the change in him. Their cautious glances and quiet whispers reminded him that his every action was under scrutiny. They spoke of honor, of the sacred traditions that had guided their people for generations. Dakota understood their concerns, but in his heart, he carried a different kind of truth, a truth born of fire and courage, the kind of truth only someone like Clara could ignite. He paused beneath a twisted mesquite tree, staring at its gnarled roots as if they held the answers. "What am I to do?" he murmured, his voice carried away by the wind. "How can I honor the rules I have lived by and yet not betray the feelings that now define me?" Dakota's inner conflict was mirrored by the village itself. The Apache people trusted him implicitly, yet they were wary of outsiders. To show favor, to allow attachment to someone like Clara could be seen as weakness, a compromise of the leadership they revered. And yet, he could not imagine a life without her presence, without the fire in her eyes, without the courage she embodied at every turn. Hours passed as he wrestled with himself, pacing the riverbank and speaking softly to the wind, the water, and the mountains that had been witnesses to his life. The more he tried to adhere to tradition, the more he realized that some bonds could not be denied. Love, like the river, could not be dammed. It carved its own path, shaping the world around it, whether one wanted it to or not. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Dakota had reached a reluctant clarity. He could not ignore Clara. He could not dismiss what she had awakened in him. Duty and desire were no longer mutually exclusive. They were intertwined, and he would need to find a way to honor both, however difficult that path might be. Dakota returned to the village, his movements measured, his expression calm but his mind a whirlwind of decisions yet to come. Clara's presence had changed him, challenged him, and stirred his heart in ways he could never have anticipated. And as he looked across the valley toward the small lodge where she had stayed, he knew one truth above all else, whatever the cost: he could not let her go. The chief's inner conflict was far from resolved, but the seed of a new path had been planted, a path where courage, love, and defiance would shape both his destiny and Clara's in ways neither of them could yet foresee. The sun had barely crested the cliffs of the Arizona Valley when the first signs of trouble appeared. Smoke curled from the distant canyon, twisting like a warning signal against the pale morning sky. Clara Bennett, already on edge after recent events, sensed danger before the village scouts confirmed it. A band of outlaws had returned, larger and more determined than before. Dakota moved like a shadow through the village, his presence commanding and focused. Warriors readied themselves with practiced efficiency, bows strung, rifles checked, and horses led to safer ground. Clara stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart racing but her resolve unwavering. She had faced danger before, but this time the stakes were higher. It was not only her life at risk, it was Dakota's people, the village that had become a fragile home, and, she realized, the man who had captured her heart. "Clara," Dakota said, his voice cutting through the morning chaos, "and stay behind. Do not expose yourself. You are not ready for this." Clara met his gaze, unwavering. "I cannot hide while others fight, Dakota." "I will help." The chief's jaw tightened. He had seen her courage before, but he knew it was tempered by recklessness, a combination that could get her killed. Yet he also knew her spirit could not be contained, and in that recognition he found himself silently approving. "Then follow my lead and stay close." The outlaws appeared over the ridge, a wave of movement and menace, their shouts carried by the wind. Clara's pulse quickened, and she found herself in the center of the conflict before she realized it, moving to protect a group of children caught near the village outskirts. Bullets whizzed past, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. She ducked behind a boulder, scanning for anyone in danger. Then she saw him, a young boy frozen in terror, trapped near the edge of the pass. One of the outlaws raised his rifle, aiming directly at the child. Clara didn't hesitate. She sprinted forward, diving to scoop him up and drag him behind cover. Her arms trembled from adrenaline, but the boy's grateful eyes steadied her. Dakota had noticed her act immediately. Despite the chaos, he surged forward with his warriors, their coordinated attack scattering the outlaws. His dark eyes never left Clara, scanning to ensure she remained safe. When the smoke of gunfire cleared, the outlaws had retreated into the canyon, leaving dust and echoes behind. Breathing heavily, Clara lowered the boy to safety. Dakota approached her slowly, his expression unreadable, though his chest rose and fell rapidly with exertion. "You risked everything," he said, voice low but carrying a mix of reprimand and awe. Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I could not leave him," she said simply. "I could not." For a long moment, Dakota studied her. Her courage, her selflessness, her unwillingness to be a passive outsider, it all struck him deeply. He saw in her something beyond beauty or defiance. He saw honor, strength, and a heart that could match his own in loyalty and fire. The realization unsettled him more than any battle ever had. The village slowly returned to its rhythm, though the air remained tense with lingering fear. Children clung to their mothers, warriors tended to their weapons, and the elders exchanged wary glances. Yet Dakota's attention remained fixed on Clara. For him, the battle had been more than a test of skill or courage. It had revealed the depths of the connection between them. Clara, too, felt a shift. She had proven her bravery not just to the village, but to Dakota. In his eyes, she saw acknowledgement and respect, but also something more tender, more dangerous: desire. The chief, stoic and disciplined, had been moved by her actions, and she knew it. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley, Clara and Dakota shared a quiet understanding. Danger would always find them in the wildlands. But their bond had been tested, strengthened, and deepened. Whatever the challenges ahead, neither could deny that the spark between them had grown into a flame, and it was only just beginning to burn. The valley lay quiet under a blazing midday sun, but for Chief Dakota, peace had become impossible. The events of the past days, the outlaw attacks, Clara's bravery, the sparks that had ignited between them, had forced him to confront something he had long buried, the truth of his heart. Clara Bennett was no ordinary outsider. She was fierce, fearless, and irreversibly entwined with his fate. Yet to act on that truth meant breaking the customs and traditions he had upheld all his life. He walked along the edge of the sacred grove, the very place she had dared to enter days before. Every tree and stone seemed to whisper reminders of the rules he had been raised to follow, the elders' warnings echoing in his mind. "Dakota," one voice had said, "to favor an outsider is to invite dishonor." Another had cautioned, "Your people watch. Your choices shape the tribe." He had always obeyed, placing the tribe's needs above his own heart. But now the balance had shifted. Clara's presence had shown him that sometimes courage and love must take precedence over rigid tradition. Dakota closed his eyes, feeling the wind stir the dust at his feet. He thought of Clara, how she had saved the child during the outlaw attack, how she had faced danger without hesitation, and how her fearless spirit had refused to bow to fear or convention. He remembered that night when words failed them and their eyes had spoken what hearts could not hide. He had tried to suppress his longing, tried to tell himself that duty outweighed desire, but each attempt only deepened the ache in his chest. Finally, Dakota opened his eyes, the decision settling like steel in his mind. He would break tradition. He would acknowledge his feelings for Clara, whatever the consequences. He could no longer pretend that adherence to rules mattered more than the bond that had formed between them. To deny her or himself was no longer an option. He returned to the village, moving with a purpose that drew the attention of the warriors and elders. His every step carried authority, tempered by the tension of a man stepping into uncharted territory. When Clara emerged from the lodge, tending to the horses with a quiet diligence, Dakota's gaze fell on her. The sight of her bathed in sunlight and dust stirred him more deeply than any ritual or tradition ever had. "Clara," he said, his voice low but commanding. She turned to face him, reading the resolve in his eyes. "You are here," she said softly, hope and apprehension mingling in her tone. "I am," he replied, stepping closer, "and I must speak plainly. I have ignored my heart for too long, bound by rules that I can no longer follow. You have awakened something in me that cannot be denied. I will not turn away regardless of the warnings of my people or the customs I have upheld all my life." Clara's breath caught. She had expected caution, perhaps hesitation, but not this declaration. This open defiance of everything that had kept him disciplined, guarded, and apart. She felt a thrill, a surge of emotion that matched her own longing. "Dakota," she whispered, I feel the same. I did not come here seeking love, yet I cannot deny it now." The chief's dark eyes softened, reflecting a mixture of relief, desire, and the weight of the choice he had just made. Around them, the village seemed to pause as if sensing the monumental step he had taken. He was breaking rules, defying expectations, risking judgment, but he was also embracing a truth that had been impossible to ignore. "I will protect you," he said quietly, "even if it means defying every expectation placed upon me. You are not just an outsider. You are part of this life now. Part of me." Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "And I will stand by you," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever comes, we face it together." For the first time in years, Dakota felt a sense of alignment between duty and desire. He had chosen love, chosen courage, and chosen Clara. Breaking tradition had never felt so right nor so inevitable. The bond between them, forged in danger and tempered by trust, had now been solidified in open acknowledgement. As the sun moved higher in the sky, casting warm light over the valley, Dakota and Clara stood together, united against the world, their hearts bound by defiance, courage, and an undeniable love that neither rule nor danger could undo. The village square was alive with the rhythm of daily life, children laughing, warriors practicing maneuvers, women tending to chores, and the elders watching with cautious eyes. Yet beneath the familiar cadence, a different tension simmered, one that only Dakota and Clara could truly feel. The choice to defy tradition had been made, but now came the harder test, to face the tribe and acknowledge their bond openly, regardless of judgment or consequence. Clara stood near the center of the square, her heart pounding like the drum beats that echoed in the distance. She had spent days navigating this world, learning its rules, respecting its customs, and gradually earning a tentative acceptance, but nothing had prepared her for what was about to come. She could see the anticipation in Dakota's eyes, the quiet command he wielded even in moments of vulnerability. This was his moment as much as hers, and yet the weight of it pressed heavily on both of them. Dakota raised his hand, calling for silence. The village immediately obeyed, the hum of daily activity falling away like wind cutting through the canyon. All eyes turned toward him, and even the elders, wise and observant, could not hide their curiosity. "People of my tribe," Dakota began, his voice steady, yet carrying the gravity of his decision. "For generations our customs have guided us. They protect our people, our lands, and our spirits. They have shaped who we are, and I have followed them with unwavering dedication." He paused, letting the words sink in, scanning the faces around him. He saw trust, respect, curiosity, and skepticism, each a reflection of the delicate balance he was about to disrupt. Then his gaze found Clara, and he continued, his voice softening only slightly as it reached her. "But there are moments when life demands courage beyond the laws of tradition. There are times when the heart must speak, even if it risks everything we hold sacred." Clara's breath caught. She had never heard Dakota speak so openly, so vulnerably in front of others. Every word resonated not just with her but with the villagers who began to sense the depth of his resolve. "This woman," he said, stepping closer to Clara, "is not merely an outsider. She has shown bravery, wisdom, and honor beyond measure. She has risked herself for our people and faced dangers that would have turned others away. And in doing so, she has captured my heart." A hush fell over the square. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as villagers exchanged glances, some startled, some approving, and some uncertain. Dakota's gaze never wavered from Clara's. She felt the weight of his words settle on her like sunlight, warm and irrevocable. "I declare," Dakota continued, his voice ringing clear and unwavering, "that Clara Bennett stands with us not as an outsider, but as a part of this tribe and my life. I will protect her, honor her, and bind my fate to hers." Clara felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. She stepped forward, her hand reaching for his. "And I," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her, "stand with you, Dakota. Whatever comes, I will be by your side." The square erupted, not in chaos, but in a chorus of reaction. Some villagers nodded with approval, others whispered in surprise, but the respect for Dakota's choice and Clara's courage was undeniable. Even the elders, after a tense silence, offered subtle nods, acknowledging that the chief's heart had guided him wisely. Dakota tightened his hand around Clara's, a quiet affirmation of their bond. The public declaration had changed everything. They were no longer secret allies in love. They were united in sight of the entire tribe, their connection sanctioned not by tradition alone, but by courage, respect, and undeniable truth. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the village square, Clara and Dakota stood side by side. Their hearts beat in tandem, each step forward now unafraid, their love no longer confined by fear or custom. In that moment, the valley seemed to exhale with them, acknowledging that courage and devotion, like the desert itself, could endure any trial and carve their own path through even the most rigid of traditions. The valley was quiet, bathed in the warm light of a late afternoon sun that set the cliffs ablaze with gold and crimson. Clara Bennett stood at the edge of the village, her fingers brushing against the coarse fabric of her dress as she watched the children play, under the careful supervision of the Apache women. Laughter echoed through the air, mingling with the gentle rustle of sagebrush, a melody that spoke of peace earned and a life slowly rebuilding. Dakota approached her, his long shadow stretching across the sunlit ground. His dark eyes softened when they met hers, the weight of the past weeks, danger, defiance, and the defiance of tradition, lifting to reveal a quiet joy neither had allowed themselves to feel before. He had chosen love over convention, courage over fear, and now, Standing here with Clara by his side, he understood that the world they were building together was stronger for every risk they had taken. "You have grown accustomed to this life," Dakota said gently, his voice carrying both warmth and wonder. "And yet I see that your spirit remains unbroken, untamed as it always was." Clara smiled, the hint of dust and sweat from her days of labor and adventure, giving her a rugged glow that even she could not have imagined. "I have," she admitted, "because I am no longer alone." She gestured to the village, the people, the land, and finally to him. "This is no longer just a place to survive. It is home, and it is ours." Dakota reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Ours," he repeated, the word resonating like a vow in the open air. They had both defied the rules, faced danger, and challenged tradition, but in doing so, they had forged a bond that was unbreakable. The villagers had accepted them, cautiously at first, but with growing respect and admiration. Clara had proven herself through courage and compassion. Dakota had led with integrity and openness. Even the elders had come to recognize that love, tempered by bravery and loyalty, could coexist with tradition rather than threaten it. Together, Clara and Dakota walked through the village, observing the harmony they had helped nurture. Children waved as they passed, women smiled with approval, and warriors gave subtle nods of respect. Each acknowledgement, though quiet, was a testament to the journey they had undertaken, one of defiance, risk, and ultimately, unity. As they reached the edge of the valley, the desert stretching endlessly before them, Dakota paused. He turned to Clara, his gaze steady and unwavering. "The future will not be without challenges," he said. "There will always be those who question our choices, those who do not understand the bond we share. But together we are stronger than any doubt or danger that may come." Clara's hand tightened around his. "We will face it all," she said firmly. "Together. Whatever comes, we will endure it, and we will thrive." Dakota smiled, a rare, full smile that reached his eyes and softened the stoicism he carried as chief. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to believe that love and duty could coexist, that tradition and desire could be reconciled. And in Clara, he had found a partner who was not only his equal in courage and resolve, but the one who had awakened his heart to a life he had never dared to imagine. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley in fiery hues as Clara leaned into Dakota's side. The desert wind carried with it the scent of sage, earth, and freedom, a reminder of the life they had fought to claim and the path they would walk together. In that quiet, golden moment, the valley seemed to acknowledge their triumph. Two hearts, once tethered by caution and circumstance, were now bound by choice, love, and mutual respect. The challenges of the past were behind them, and the promise of the future lay open, wide as the desert sky. Clara and Dakota stood hand in hand, ready to face whatever the world might bring. Their story, one of defiance, courage, and enduring love, had reached its beginning, not its end. Together they had created a life united, a home forged in trust, and a bond that no rule, danger, or doubt could ever break.